you're here. The format for today's session is that we'll present some of our ideas and experience, and then we'll open up for questions and a discussion. So do note down your questions as we go and just hold them and be ready to come in. We do want to hear about why you're here and what you're grappling with. If you can just go to the next slide, Emma. So just by way of a little bit of framing for these 4 sessions, a few key ideas that are important to us at Collaborate. Why do we think that test and learn approach is important? Next slide, please, Emma. We're working with complex challenges. I'm sure that many of you are too, and in contexts that are complex too. And in those situations, outcomes are created by the interaction of many different actions, factors, people, organizations, by the interactions. And because of that, the route from kind of A to B is not obvious. Just because X led to Y before, it doesn't mean it will again. Every situation is unique. Every individual is unique. Next slide, Emma. And that means that we can't just say, well, we did this before, and so we'll do this again, and it will lead to the same outcome. We have to recognize that change is unpredictable. How things change is going to be different each time. And so essentially, this means that we have to continually take a test to learn approach in our work, seeing every intervention that we make as an experiment to learn from. It's why standardized approaches don't really work in that context. And that can be at the level of one-to-one interactions between a practitioner and a service user, for example, right through to big interventions that we might make in a whole system. Next slide, please, Emma. And the final kind of key idea that I want to share is that for us, then learning, it's not just about gathering insight, it's fundamentally about adaptation and change. Learning is an engaged process. We haven't actually learned anything until we've applied our insights and changed something. And learning should be continuous and iterative. It should be embedded in our work, not something that just happens at the end of a project or at the point when a service is being recommissioned, for example. Okay, so that's just a small bit of framing for the session today, which is about how we create coherence and complexity. And just to remind you, we've got 4 sessions covering what we see as 4 building blocks of a test and learn approach. Today's session, engaging in complexity, making sense of complexity. The second section is about creating a learning infrastructure. Do you want to just move the slides on, Emma? Thanks. The third session will be about data, particularly deciding what data to collect, gathering data, different methods for working with data. And then the fourth session will be about this kind of learning into action. How do we apply learning to change and improve what we do? Today, we're focusing on bringing coherence to complexity. Our traditional models of change struggle to describe the complexity we see in our work every day. And so to help us with that, we need models and frameworks to help us make sense of what's going on. My colleague Lewis Haynes is going to share some examples from Collaborate's work, developing models of change and how they've worked in practice to support learning. And then we'll open up for some discussion and hopefully to hear about your experiences and what you're grappling with in your work. So over to you, Lewis.
Great, thanks, Naomi. So yeah, today I'm gonna go through sort of maybe the first starting point that is the starting point of a lot of Collaborate's work when we're going into somewhere. And it's to try and really understand what is going on in a place and what change is trying to be achieved. Emma, can I have the next slide, please? And so we like to use a sort of a model-based approach to do this. Um, we know that working in complexity can be really overwhelming. And it can seem like there are so many different factors at play to make sense of, going back to Naomi's diagram she shared earlier, that there is so much different going on that it can be hard to bring any kind of coherence to it. And especially when we're sort of a lot of us have been based in more traditional approaches to working that involve detailed project plans that spell out steps of how you're going to achieve anything. We know that working complexity doesn't really, that's not helpful. We can't use linear processes to determine what's going to happen. So at Collaborate, we use models as a way to bring this coherence to what can be quite overwhelming, to enable you to focus on what's important to you, and alongside bracing the complexity, embracing the fact that we're not always able to determine exactly what's going to happen and what actions might create the change we're looking for. So these models are about building something that's useful, and that can make sense of that context, rather than trying to just develop a perfect strategy for change each time. And I'm sure those of you who've got experience of this recognize that, like, you can put loads of work in initially to say this is what we're going to deliver, but actually the way working complexity is means that that can change very quickly, and the plans you had might not be the right plans. You need to adapt, and that's why we take a model-based approach that can flex and work with us. Emma, can I have the next slide, please? So we think models should act as a bridge between your day-to-day activities and your strategy. So providing direction and relevance to those you are working with and yourselves, linking the sort of how what you're doing day to day is contributing to the change you're trying to do, and being able to talk to both those dimensions at the same time. We think models should be able to support your engagement with others as well. So, for instance, being able to describe the work you're trying to do to potential partners you might be trying to onboard, alongside enabling those you work with to sort of see how their work contributes to the overall. When you're doing working complexity and working with lots of partners, it can be quite tricky for everyone to understand how they fit together. By building a model about the work you are trying to do, you can demonstrate how everything fits together without necessarily needing to allocate everybody's sort of individual task. You can still demonstrate how the different aspects of change that people are working on fit into the overall picture. But as I said, models need to be flexible. You need to recognize that the things you are working on can change, and that the information you maybe used to develop them at the start might be incomplete. One of the things we use as a sort of an approach sometimes is to think of a model as a map that you at the start get your understanding on a page, but know that that map might change when you discover new things or realize that the map you initially drawn might not be quite accurate. And I think that's quite a useful phrase. It doesn't mean you have to chuck everything out. It just means you have to adapt and change to how you're working. Can I have the next slide, please, Emma? So just sort of, I've put this down into three steps, and then I'm going to go into two of our models that we have built through projects, to give you some examples of how we built them and how we use them. But the three sort of really key steps is determining what the desired change looks like from different perspectives. So it's really important that when developing these things, you are looking for as many different perspectives as possible. when we think about systems and complexity, we need to recognize that our view will be shaped by both our position in the system, whether that's of a position of power, whether that's not a position of power, or whether, as we are often consultants with an external view, we have a certain perspective, and that everybody else who is working in complexity will also have a different perspective. And the key to building a really good model is by adding lots of different perspectives together, lots of different views and opinions from multiple different places to understand really what the change you're trying to do looks like, but looks like from different places. So it's really crucial that you engage with a lot of different people, that you aren't just sitting, in an office by yourselves deciding this is what the change looks like. It's about going out, engaging with the system, engaging with the complexity in which you're facing, and understanding what different people's views and perspectives are. Then you want to think about what are the different levels in which change might occur. When we think about system working complexity, we often see different kinds of levels, and I'll in one of the examples, I'll clearly show how those levels look differently, but those levels are not necessarily the same. We, as humans, like to be able to categorize things, and so we can put in different levels and ways of looking at a system and looking at what's going on, and that the different change might look differently. What you need to change at maybe sort of an executive decision maker level might look very different from the change that you need to see at a community-based level, but they still are linked in some way. And so really exploring what those different levels look like, what the type of change those levels might occur on, is really crucial in being able to reflect that in the model you're building. And then lastly, it's mainly a point around prioritization. We know in complexity working that often focusing on one thing sort of creates multiple more sort of areas to explore, and can get quite overwhelming, and the sort of focuses of where you want to change could be quite vast. So we think models are helpful in a way of focusing on the key attributes that you are trying to work on, or the key themes, so that you can prioritize across these. When working complexity, we'll often talk about like having distributed approaches, and that there isn't a sort of complete central command. So in that, you need everyone to be able to know what they are working on and how they contribute. So having different key themes across this is a really useful way of doing that. And next slide, please, Emma. So I've got two models to bring to you today, and I'm going to talk through both of them, and then that'll sort of form the talked to part of this session. There'll be loads of time for questions and discussion afterwards. This model I'm presenting here is the four shifts model. We developed this with a asset-based community development program in East Sussex called Making It Happen. And I can probably share with the slides the full report if you're interested to explore how we use this in more detail. But the sort of starting point was that this was a asset-based community development program providing support, both to communities both through grants, but also through community development workers to support people in the community to champion ideas, champion things that they thought were valuable. And one of the things that was really clear when we started this piece of work was that they didn't want a sort of long evaluation framework that was complicated and academic. They wanted something that they could see their work in, they could see what they were trying to achieve, and how they were trying to achieve it. And so we worked with different people in East Sussex to develop this. We worked with stakeholders of organisations that were developing the program, including the sort of CEO group of that, alongside those who were delivering work on the ground, and alongside community members as well, to understand the different perspectives and change that we're trying to achieve. and thinking about what that looked like. And for this program, and that's why I think it's always we can sort of talk about a process of developing models, but generally feel that models can't just be ported from one place to another. They need to be they are designed for the program for the place you are working for. And while you might be able to shift and think about changing things for others, you really want to be ensuring that you're developing it for the program that's at hand, rather than having a generic model, because that's where people then don't see their work to it. So in this one, we were focusing on what are the kind of changes that this program Making It Happen wanted to see in the community, wanted to see across the system as a result of the program's delivery. And there were four key areas. They wanted to see changes from how people in the community were viewed, from deficits to strengths. So taking a deficit approach that was there beforehand to a strengths-based approach. They also wanted to see a change from a sort of central control approach to a locally based control approach, where they can decisions are made more at a local level, and based on what local needs are. The third area was about isolation to collaboration. So moving from a place where there might be lots of individual good programs, but that there wasn't collaboration going on, and that the sort of networking and things weren't linked together. And then lastly, moving from a place where people were prescribed to and assumed what they needed, to a place where people were being the learning was happening and people were being responded to. And so those were the key priorities. There were others when we did our investigation work, other areas of work that could have been focused, but through the process of engaging with those different stakeholders, became clear these were the really four key ones that they wanted to focus on, and enabled us to sort of build a model that people could hang their work on. But what we also recognised was that this needed to take place across multiple levels. There is changes that we wanted to see within a person. So if with individuals within a community, there were benefits we wanted to see for those individuals. And those, for instance, in the isolation to collaboration, could be improving learn skills and improving their self-esteem and confidence from it, or in the deficits of strengths, recognizing their own capabilities and skills. Those are things that individuals want to see. Then what we wanted to see was the change from person to person. So this is about how individuals or connect with each other. And so, for instance, these are things around how people might change the diversity of social networks or the type of community members that can connect and support with each other. So how is connection around people, individuals, being helped and supported through this program? Then the next layer was around services and people. So, and when we say services, clearly they could be defined in different ways, but we were mainly thinking about the more traditionally known services. So things that the local authority are delivering, or things that might being commissioned and delivered via the voluntary and community sector, but that were sort of statutory or at least provided by the council. And how they and people, the individuals, were being interacting. One of the things that we knew was that when we came in there, that there were real challenges with how sort of services were done to people, rather than recognizing what people needed and building from there. And so this program wanted to change that dynamic. And then lastly, the sort of top level of that system was how services themselves interact with each other, how they think about working, and how that affects the wider level, so a wider system. So for instance, how do different organizations, how are they able to adopt practices and then share that with others and influence how commissioning might happen? What's their role in doing that? And so through all this process, what we've got is a quite a straightforward. It fits on one page, but has a wide variety of different aspects that it can work on. And the key here is that there's enough definition so that you can understand the work, but that enough flexibility to recognize that change isn't going to look the same in each of these areas, and that the change we're trying to understand is sort of can be fitted in multiple different ways. I'll go on to the next one and then we'll break.
Before you do, Lewis,
Oh
can you
yes.
just say a little bit about then how this was used to kind of support learning
Yeah,
with the
so
program participants?
there were multiple ways. I mean, the first, most obvious way is we used it as an evaluation framework. So we gathered insight from a lot of different places, a lot of interviews and focus groups and data, and used this as a evaluation framework. So a way to interpret the data that we were using, but also used it as a tool to engage with people. So we did a number of sessions delivered in the community where we explored with partners how the work they were doing that wasn't necessarily part of the Making It Happen program also contributed to this, how their what they were trying to bring was sort of collaborated and supported what the Make It Happen program was trying to do. So really gave a way of engaging the wider system in a change of that everyone agreed was necessary, and then could see how their work complemented each other on. So it was a way of hosting some of those learning conversations, finding out the areas where actually less of this maybe was happening. I think we felt that, for instance, the assuming to, and prescribing area, actually there was less activity in there than some of the other ones, and so it was about focusing, going, actually maybe we need to, as a area, focus more time on how we can adapt and change our approach to be a better learning and responding system than we are currently. Thank you. And then on to this model, which is a model that we developed for Save the Children and their early learning communities, and a collaboration between us, Save the Children, and MPC. And this was a slightly different model where, so the last model I showed you had four different themes. In this model, we went for quite a larger theme, because these programs were very hyper local but intensive in their hyper local area. So they were trying to do change across a number of different areas, but in quite a small area. So it made sense to have the broader outlook. And so we came up with 10 conditions here, a shared purpose and vision. So a shared understanding and articulation of what the early learning communities were trying to achieve, how uh, organizations were working with a systems mindset in the area. So recognizing the interconnectivity of the system, and working towards building the conditions for longer change. Shifting power to families, how the early learning communities were able to make sure families were at the heart of decision making, and at the heart of what saying what support was needed. Trusted and collaborative relationships, how partners were investing in relationship building and trust building as a foundation of their working. Integrated support, actually, how were partners able to deliver coordinated support to families so that there was sort of a more seamless approach that didn't involve families being passed between services and services. Shared governance and accountability. So how were they building a governance structure across partners, as an early learning community to support the achievement of their goals? Aligned funding and resources. So how were they actually bringing the funding and resources they had together? Were they pooling it? Were they able to share it? And how would that look like? And what are some of the knotty legal challenges that might come from actually trying to pool resources? And then finally, we had systems leadership. So how are people taking leadership for the program, and how are people uh, taking on different roles and being supported in that? How is a culture of evaluation and learning being built in so that partners are able to reflect on their progress and adapt their approach? And then lastly, how are they building shared data and information? And so insights from like individual level and also population level data, how are they building those together? So those were the 10 systems conditions, and actually went through quite a similar process to build those which involved engaging with the local community, engaging with families, trying to understand the sort of different areas they need support with, and then also for the partners and program deliverers in that area, like what are the different things that might be needed to ensure the success and sustainability of this kind of approach, because at least for this model, it was a time limited intervention from Save the Children. So it was thinking about how could this be more sustainable. And so that sort of recognized in the way this is different from the previous model is there is more about the way the partnership looks and the way the partnership is organized as much as there is about the sort of change wanting to be seen on the ground. And in this model, instead of a levels across the system, because the system in this area was quite small because it was a small area, instead we were looking at like the maturity of the places. And so we used a framing of maturity that ran from emerging uh, to developing to maturing and thriving. It's important to state that we weren't using these as performance indicators. It wasn't about you must shift all of these conditions from emerging to developing. It was more about a reflective tool that enabled you to say, okay, this in one of these conditions, we are um, we're emerging, we're just starting out. In some of these other ones, we're developing or maturing, we're a lot better at those, and enabling that like prioritization and decision making to go, oh, actually, if this is where we want to grow, then this is what we need to be doing, and these are the areas we need to be focusing on. Beneath this, in the full model, there is for each of these 10 conditions across each of those four levels of maturity, there are indicators that we developed from the initial consultation that sort of said, okay, shared purpose of vision looks like this at an emerging level, this at a developing level, this at a maturing level, and this at a thriving level. And why I say it wasn't used as a performance tool is those were taken from the initial consultation work, but we recognised that those could change. And also, this was across there were four different programs as four different early learning communities. Actually, that the sort of how that theme or condition looked could be very different in each area. So those indicators were a uh, a prompt, a help, a tool, but they weren't there to actually mark or moderate people. It was, and in the end, we did throughout the few years of this, we changed those indicators as we learn more about the program, as the program grew, to reflect the different ways that could look. But they were a useful reflection tool to sort of see what progress has been made. Do we think we've sort of made that next step up to the next sort of level of maturity of this condition or not? And similarly in that one, this was a not only was it a helpful tool for the program, it was really helpful for engaging partners, decision makers in the system, because they were able to see actually where are these programs working and what are they trying to shift, and therefore how are we trying to shift as well. And so I guess just as I'm coming to the end of this, the take home is that these models enabled what was quite a tricky thing, either whether it was the asset-based community development program, which has lots of different ways that can look and feel, and lots of different ways to interpret that change, and this program around early learning communities trying to improve early learning outcomes in like hyperlocal areas, that by using a model like this, you were able to bring um, coherence to the quite complex challenge, and really focus on what was important for those local places, what was important for that program, and build out from that, and use this as a tool of both the day-to-day working, but also an engagement and a strategy tool, which enabled lots of people to come together to see their own work and ultimately sort of collaborate better. Right, you can have the next slide, please. So, that's all the sort of taught stuff from us. We wanted to just give a chance to hear people's questions, or comments or reflections about it. So I think yeah, I'll open it up if anyone does have any questions. I haven't been looking at the chat while I've been going, so there might be some questions in there as well. but feel free to put up your hand if you have a question.
I can see, is it Jenny? Got your hand up? Go for it.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. And I am a big fan of working in that kind of collaborative way with all the stakeholders to like develop frameworks like that. I wonder what your experience of, and if you've got any advice for me, please, of it's like buy-in from particularly like that exec level. So the four shifts model and the second model that you shared there. In my experience, people are happy for that to kind of be put down as this like initial framework, but then I get a lot of like pushback, I suppose, from those at exec level about they want that more logic model approach and they're looking for this academic language. And the main grapple is they also want us to try and assign some kind of numerical value to evidence the positive change. So I know you can't fix that for me, but any advice on how you approach that kind of discussion with people that are pushing for that?
Yeah, I can start with I think you're right. Those are challenges we see all the time. I think a really that push for somehow to have a numerical value, even though this is hugely complex, and yet we can't just sit there and go, no, you're wrong, because often those people are decision makers. So we've got to sort of tread both of those lines. I think my advice would be the proof is in both how it engages and enables people, so that this isn't just about a evaluation framework. It is a tool for engagement and demonstrating to decision makers how working in this way brings people together, brings coherence that a logic model, for instance, doesn't always manage to do, but also in how um I always my other advice is always to try and get some data and then have a discussion about what that means, rather than what often happens with logic models is we'll get everything up front and then we'll say what data we're going to have, and then you spend all your time chasing that or not being able to do it. And so actually, and this is a bit of holding the tension and holding the line, but how can you get some data in using this kind of framework and demonstrate how this actually does generate change, how this does tell you what change is occurring. And I find then people are far more receptive to that if they have that information to hand and you can demonstrate it. And also, I mean, we certainly find that I guess a lot of this work also we think is about a bit about rebalancing power. And so when you have these kind of models that say either frontline workers or the communities recognize themselves in a lot more, and they can be advocates for, and I mean, the four shifts model really, like the advocation, is that a word, that came from the community development workers of like, this actually, we see our work in this and we want to use it, was actually what was really convincing for everyone else, because they were like, okay, well, if the people delivering this program are saying we'll use this, we'll give you data through this model and we'll use it, then they that was a convincing as well. So it's, I don't think there's any sort of, there's no quick answer, but I think it's by demonstrating its use and demonstrating its value and going through some of those cycles of learning and showing how this is changing and adapting how you're working. Because ultimately, if you are trying to do this complex working, you sort of should hopefully understand that it's not going to be that linear approach.
That's really useful. Thank you.
I wonder if anyone else has got their own kind of experience of that they want to share. Any other advice for Jenny? Or some of you must have grappled with similar.
Susan, do you want to come in?
Hi everyone, I'm Susan. Sorry, did you ask me to come in? I was just thinking, oh, did I just really hear that? I thought I thought the question was really interesting because it made me smile, because that is something that I've had to grapple with in my experience. And it was really good to see the second model in particular. I come from a background of place-based working on the Sport England physical activity programme. And we did use a maturity matrix that's very similar with, I think, Collaborate have supported on that. And my experience is that actually being very pragmatic, you're going to have to respond to a number of stakeholders in any project or program, be it funders, be it the community, be it different partners in the system, and taking a mixed evaluation approach, I find has normally been really helpful. So you have that you have the learning tools, you have almost that kind of ever-changing, ever-adapting, more qualitative feedback, stories, etc. And that works quite nicely actually alongside the more harder data, shall we say, and what Lewis was saying, try and bring in other data as well to almost either back it up or work alongside it, or maybe even not backing up. It's another alternative view. And what it raises questions of is actually why is that showing that, but why are we hearing or seeing that there? And that generates more discussion. So we found that mixed evaluation plans sometimes helps to almost satisfy the different kind of views and needs and wants. So in the place-based program, we actually did use, as I mentioned, so it was the maturity matrix, but with different conditions on it, slightly different conditions because it was about physical activity. But we also did have a theory of change, so this logic model that overarched it, because of course, with a kind of a widely funded program, talk about millions of pounds, there is inevitably going to be a need to show outcomes, improvement, and change. So the logic model helps you almost to look at your problem, obviously, look at your outcomes and your activity and your short-term and longer outcomes. So that's almost set. But I find that actually having the learning models and the hard data really helps to, what's the word, build up the evidence, but also build up, what shall I say, help decision making of where you actually need to look at things differently or where you might need to change and flex, because it's not a one tool that you use at the end of a program. Use it iteratively and continuously for the lifetime of a project or a program. So I hope that helps a bit.
It really does. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or reflections at all? Oh, Britta.
Hi. Sorry, I was just figuring out where to unmute myself. Thank you. That was really nice. I really like the model, particularly the second one. And my question is kind of around the facilitation that led to this. So I'm now imagining myself in a room with quite a complex group of people, and we're working towards something like this. So my question is around the kind of, so when you look at the system conditions that you wanted to change, so the process of arriving at those, that kind of, how do we agree on what it is that we want to change and select those, whether it's 3 or 10? And then I'm thinking as well around the scale of maturity. So there will be some kind of indicators, I guess, that say, when do we know that we can move this particular one then from maturing into thriving, or to use that as that. I wonder if you could say a bit more about the sort of facilitation process.
Yeah, so I think that to start with on that, our approach is normally always a sort of an appreciative approach. So rather than trying to predetermine the outcomes or whatever we're trying to achieve, we'd be trying to listen to what different people are talking about and using quite an open approach. So appreciative inquiry is something we use quite a lot in that, to really give different people different chances and different perspectives to say what is important to them. I think, for instance, in that Save the Children model, like community members were probably less talking about governance and the sort of setup of the early learning community, but they were really talking about having their voices centered and feeling able to influence the early learning community and its work. And so it was a process of gathering and trying to really gather openly, not trying to predetermine that in too much, and then taking it back, then doing our sort of analysis of trying to pull out those themes, those areas, those conditions, and then going back, playing it back with sort of we quite like using the sort of term of working in the open. We're trying to show our processes through that, and that was a real case of, okay, well, we do need to do some analysis, and probably best done by us, but we'll do it. We'll go back, we'll check that our working is correct. I'm trying to, my colleague actually did this, but I think some of the things were grouped differently, or there might have been more or less conditions, and then there was a process of sort of honing down, or separating out, and then even actually through the program, I changed a few of them based on then doing some more rounds of engagement with this, that actually these made more sense here or there. So I think that's why I think it's important that it sort of feels living as well. These are tools to help with the delivery of the program and the reflection that goes in it. And through that you get lots of insight and learning that you can use. But for instance, if you try to change a questionnaire that you were using for an outcome tool halfway through, you would say, well, that's changed all the data you're gathering because the numbers don't make sense. But the point is that these tools weren't there to do that. It's okay for us to change the conditions if that's now a better representation of the change this is in trying to achieve. And so I think on your second point about the indicators were there to give they're mainly questions, to give points of reflection and points of sort of, this thing looks different now, this condition looks manifestly different, but clearly there was a lot of overlap. And I think within the first time we used it, very quickly we were like, okay, they're between emerging and developing. Like it doesn't there's always gray areas between them. I think it's a useful tool because it was a useful tool to help prioritize them. But what we were very keen on not doing is saying, right, you've made positive change because you've moved these conditions along, because actually also some of those conditions were really like dependent on the system. Like there were some where because there was like they went into a sort of an area of high collaboration, then they were really quite already on the sort of maturing element. And there were others where there was very little collaboration. Well, it might take years even to just build up that collaboration to the next level, but that's okay. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they're focusing on. That's just a sort of a way to hang it, and again, I guess, bring the coherence to it so that you do know what you're working towards, but you're also not pinning yourself on these very determined outcomes.
Can I jump in, Lewis, and just
Yeah.
there's such a lot in these questions and in so many different directions we could go. But yeah, I was just thinking about your question, Britta, about the kind of how you get to these models and the kind of facilitation. And I think that we in Collaborate, we really work hard to think about the design of every sort of conversation that we have, and particularly the questions that we're asking. And there's something about sort of how simple can you make the question in order to get to the sort of the complexity that you want. And sometimes, the simplest of questions, what would good look like for you in this kind of, in 3 years' time, what's the thing that would most have made the difference to you in shifting something that you want to change? These kind of very simple questions that can really unlock the things, as Lewis said, that really matter to people. So even though you're working in complexity and you're trying to develop something which is complex and make sense of complexity, you don't have to use complex kind of language to do that, in my opinion, and especially when you're wanting to work with a whole bunch of different stakeholders. And I think the other thing, and I think colleagues that worked on the Making It Happen kind of 4 shifts framework, and Lewis, you've mentioned this, kind of the importance of using the language that people are using and trying to maintain that so that people can see their language and the way that they see things in the final models, so that when you then start to use them to have those learning conversations, you can still kind of carry that language through. I will hand back to Lewis.
Is there anything else for anyone else? Any other questions or clarifications or just reflections?
I'd love to hear other people's experiences of sort of using models, particularly for learning. I think we're sort of familiar maybe a bit more with frameworks for evaluation, but I think using them in a learning context is a little bit different. Anybody want to share any experiences of that, or challenges that other challenges that they've kind of encountered? Yeah, Jill, go ahead.
I think you're muted, Jill, sorry.
Of course I am. Well, I'm a bit croaky today, so anyway. So I'm facilitating a Tackling Loneliness program across East Sussex, taking a human learning systems approach. So my approach has been to create shared learning opportunities across a range of services and organisations at every layer of the system, where we kind of to help to influence the program. But my challenge is that we've got a stewardship group which restricts the people in that group. And we've only had 2 meetings over the last year and a half for that group, but it feels that it's not been understood how important it is for those shared learning opportunities, whether it's a webinar, whether it's in-person shared learning group or online. I've also been delivering Loneliness Matters workshop, which increases the learning, increasing our reach to lots of different services. So my challenge is, how do I convince those in power that this has been really helpful and really useful? And the stewardship group is only one aspect of the shared learning within the program.
I want to say come to our next session, because that's definitely what we'll be talking about. But go on, Lewis.
Well, I think, I mean, as you know, Jill, I know a bit about that program because we did some of the initial work for it. I think there is something about like building the structures to enable learning to happen, and that's as Naomi said, that's what our next session is going to be on. It's about making sure that those structures are in place to support that learning, that they feed in, and so that everyone is agreed how those are going to work, and so that you're not just relying on, say, the stewardship group. You actually have the different instances that produce the insight you need, and that you're then doing the work to share that with those who need it. So I think there is building the learning community, even if the stewardship group are less engaged with it, so that you're generating really useful insights that eventually they're not going to be able to sort of just sit and have 2 meetings, because you've got all this wealth of this is actually what we need to be doing.
Yeah, it makes me think of Jenny's question that, you kicked us off with, Jenny, about the sort of quantitative data sort of versus learning. And there's always something for me about, and I think, Lewis, you mentioned the kind of like, fine, collect the quantitative data, but then put it in front of people and say, so what? What is this actually telling you? Yes, this data is telling you that we've achieved this output, or we haven't, or the indicators are going in the right direction, or they're not. But what do we know about the why? Because if we don't understand the why behind the quantitative data, then we can't change anything. We don't know what to do differently. And if people don't have that curiosity about what lies behind the data, then you're not going to do any learning. So for me, the challenge is always, how do you tap into that curiosity? How do you figure out what people are curious about, and really what is it that they want to understand about the program, or the thing that you're trying to learn about, the system change. Because if you can find that, if you can tap into that, then any data is interesting. And then the second thing is just to make sure that people can have a good conversation. Like if the conversation isn't interesting to people, then they're not going to show up for it. I'm sure, like if you feel you've had a good conversation with us today, maybe you'll show up next week for the second session. If you go away thinking, well, that was something and nothing, then maybe you won't. Zara.
Yeah, it was just to come in to say, the bit at the beginning really helped me to articulate something that I've been struggling with in my work, which is that learning only happens when you use the insight to change what you're doing. And I think in some of the spaces I'm in, people celebrate learning for learning's sake and say, oh, we learned something, but it's that next step of, yeah, but what, but then what? And that kind of really crystallized it in a way. I've written it down. People are probably going to be sick of hearing me saying it over the next little while, but I just wanted to, to kind of say thanks for helping, crystallize that kind of thought I've been having.
Well, I'm glad it's helpful. I think the point is also like designing your process so that like from the get-go, you're like, how am I going to implement this? Because there is so much in our sector that is insight production, producing reports, producing evaluations, and very little thought into the stage that's actually the most important stage. What we're going to do about it, how we're going to change what we're doing off the back of it, and that's a real shame because actually, if we implemented all the research and evaluation that we had, the sector would be miles better. But the problem is we produce all of it with very little thought of how is it going to be implemented. So if you are designing up from the get-go, okay, we're going to do this piece of work and we're going to, whatever comes out of it, this is how we're going to think about how we put this back in, how we learn from it. That's really crucial. So anything you can do to sort of pull towards that, I think is really helpful and productive. Okay, I think we're just a few minutes out. So unless there's any other burning questions, maybe Naomi, do you wanna close down and tell everyone about the what's next?
I will. I just note, Susan, your question linked to everyone in the chat about kind of interested to hear about people's experiences of kind of using models or frameworks to have those conversations. In our next session, we'll definitely be talking about kind of, what do good learning spaces look like, and how do you create those good conversations. So if you're going to join us for that, we can definitely come back to that. If anyone's got experience they want to share directly with Susan, then let her know. I think we actually wanted to ask you, just picking up on Zara's question, what actions might you be taking away from this session? Learning into action. So if there's anything that you want to share in the chat about what you might be taking away to do or to implement, we'd love to hear that. And then Emma, if you could just pop up the last slide. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us and for your questions and for sharing your experiences. It's been really interesting to hear what you're grappling with. As we know that some of you are looking for kind of help and guidance and more than you can get in probably this set of webinars, we are offering a 1-hour follow-up call to anyone that would like it. You might think of it as a sort of diagnostic conversation to help you think through your challenge and kind of identify ways forward. So if you're interested in having a follow-up call with one of us at Collaborate, then please contact Emma on the email on the slide, and we'll book you in. It'd be lovely to hear more about what you're up to. Please do, if you're not already on Collaborate's mailing list, you probably already are, but do join our mailing list. You can use the QR code on this. And just a reminder that our next session will be next Thursday, the 16th of October, same time, and it's on building the infrastructure for learning. So we'll definitely be picking up on some of the kind of points that people have been raising today. And we'll share the recording with you once it's ready. So thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.